Hello, today I'm going to take you through an example of creating a Worksheet Copy template and running it. If you've had a look at the website, you'll know that Worksheet Copy is an add-in to Excel, which is open source, so you can modify and change as will. The actual add-in adds a tab into the top of the Excel workbook, and on that tab there is simply three options: one, to run an existing Worksheet Copy template; two, to add a new Worksheet Copy template or edit an existing one; and three, to delete a Worksheet Copy template that you no longer want. First of all, what we're going to do is we're going to go and run through editing one. Just to speed things up, we'll use an existing one rather than adding one from scratch. So we've got an original name called test copy for the name, and in this you'll see in the top left hand corner around here we can actually select source worksheets we want to use. We can select either multiple worksheets from one workbook, or indeed multiple workbooks and worksheets from them. In this example we've selected a worksheet from two different workbooks. To actually create an entry in here, you need to give the source a name, you need to select the source. You select the source by using the button here, which takes you through to be able to select the source that you. Once you select it, click OK. That will update the workbook, and it will also update the available worksheets in that workbook. In this case, we've actually only got one worksheet within the workbook. You select that, and then you can either add that to the list down here, or you can update the existing one. Just to show you adding, I'm going to change the name here, and we're going to add it just to show you a new one being added to the list down the bottom there. Also, if you want to remove something, just select, highlight it, and then hit the minus button, which will delete it effectively. So that's very simple how you add a new worksheet and workbook to be available from copying from this template copy. You can also select a single target. Again, to select the target, you select the button, and that gives you a choice of selecting where the target workbook is. Select OK, that brings that back. That'll update the drop down list with available sheets. Again, there's only one sheet here called target group. We select that, and now we both have a list of sources and our single target. Once we've done that, we can then go ahead and actually create some rules of copying data from these sources to this target over here. In this example, we've already got two existing rules we've specified. I'll just highlight the first one, and that will bring that up into the edit section at the top here. Again, as with the source, you've got to give each row that you add a name. I haven't given it very meaningful names here. Once you're given a name, you can then select the source. That uses the names that were up here. So indeed it's got group 1 and group 2, the two sources that are left. In this case we've selected group 1 as the source. That will allow us to then select a range from that source. So it's going to use group 1, workbook 1 here, source workbook 1, and the worksheet, and it will bring that up when I click here to display that workbook and worksheet, as you can see. This is the pre-selected row here to start our copy from. So it's the starting point from the copy. We'll want to copy from this row, these columns from this row, and in this case you'll see that we want to copy to the end. But let's concentrate on what we're copying here. Here we've selected a contiguous range of 4 columns to copy. But equally we could have selected not just a contiguous range, but we can select individual cells. So we could have selected the first name, and then holding down the control key we could have selected the year, and then maybe will copy column. So There you'll see that we don't have to make the ranges contiguous. We can select individual cells, or indeed I could actually select and say what I want to do is select not only a individual cell but also a range. Okay, but in our case here we actually want to select 4 contiguous cells, so it's easy enough just to select the whole range by dragging across. Again, when you're actually selecting a range, it can only should be the starting row, or if you're doing it column wise, the starting column. So if this was your headers down here, you would be selecting potentially this column to copy down that way. But you could have started over here. You could start anywhere effectively where you want to copy from. Once we've selected the range, we can go back and we can then select how we want to repeat. So we can repeat by 2 things: either the full rows range, so that'd be from the starting row to the last complete row used, or you could select by count, which basically says start from this row or this column and select the next X number of rows or columns, and you could say 20 here or whatever you want, 100 or whatever you want in that sense. And it will repeat that many times. In this case we're just going to say go until the last row that's got data in it. Not only can we select that we want to, we can also conditionally select a condition for copying data. So say we don't want to copy every row in this case, we want to copy only certain rows. So in this example we've actually got 2 conditions here, and it's an AND condition, so each row's got to meet both conditions. So what we've done here is in the source, we've selected a source cell, and in this case it's the year column, and we've said year has got to equal 1. And, could have been all, in this case we've got an and in this case the current student equal to yes as well. You'll notice this red highlighted area. Because we selected this row to start from, you can only specify a condition somewhere along that row. What it will do then is test that condition for every row automatically down as it tries to process each row, but it's actually only looking for the starting row where the condition will for the starting row, and it has to be on the same row, or if it was a column wise selection, in the same column as you selected for copying from. Okay, so we've then said yes, we want to do that. We've got an operator we can do. We've used equals in both cases, but you can select a number of operators here, contains, etc., etc. So a number of different conditions you could meet. So it could be greater than a value, or not containing some sort of value, etc., etc. But this is a very simple condition where we want to make sure that the year is equal to 1 and that the student is still a member of the school or college. Remember, when you're adding conditions or updating them, to use the update, whatever you edit up here doesn't appear or update down here until you press one of these buttons, either update an existing row or add a new row. Or indeed, if you select a row here and want to delete it, hit the minus sign here and that will delete it. So once we've selected our condition for the source, we can then specify, well, where do we want to place this data in the target? And in this instance we're actually going to do we're going to select those four columns that we selected, and we're going to transpose them into rows. Now the tool knows that you've actually transposed it because it's expecting 4 cells to be selected, and if it's not selected in a row and it's selected by column, it knows you're trying to transpose the data into from, in this case, from horizontal into a vertical column-wise pasting. So here we've selected where we want to start from and the 4 rows to paste into, but likewise the target didn't have to be contiguous. So we could have said, although the source was contiguous in terms of the columns we want to select, we could split that up and say we want to paste the data into row 2, in this case 4, 8 and 10. Bear in mind the order of what you selected in the source and the order in which you specified here is the order in which it will move the data from the source to the target. So it's very critical that they're in the same order and how you select them. So, for example, you could have specified number 1 being cell 10 and then number 2 that row 5 being 3rd and then row 8. So that would just change the order of all those pastings. Let's go back to what we really wanted, which was we're just going to do it very simple and say we're just going to transpose it, and they're going to be contiguous going from 2 to 5. Once you've selected target, you can then specify a condition by which you want to copy. There's two options. You don't have to specify a condition. You could just let it paste one, in this case one column after the next, or you could specify a condition, or you could say paste it from my starting column 2 but actually find the first blank one. And that's very useful if you've got multiple conditions, because you might have filled up, although you said start from column 2, you might have filled up already to a number of columns which you don't know, because in condition 1 could have filled out the first 5 columns, and then condition 2 you want to start after that. So by saying is empty, it'll only start, even though you said column 2, it'll only start after the first available blank one. So that's quite useful. You can also, in this instance, when you do check to make sure the column is blank, you can also say don't check in this case the rows we're pasting to, check a completely different row to make sure it's blank, which can be useful in a scenario where you've not got data on every row you're copying to, but another row always has data up to the end. Okay, but in this example we're not doing that. We're going to use a condition statement, and the condition statement basically is going to do a match. So it's looking to make sure that a value in source cell for the row we're copying from matches a column value in the target. And in this case, if I select the source first, because it's probably easier to view it that way, we've said, again selecting the first row we're going to copy, we've said make sure education ID is equal to the education ID in the target. Notice education ID isn't actually getting copied, and it doesn't have to be any value that's being copied, but anything in the row, starting row, you could use as a condition for copying. So that's the source, and what we're seeing here is matching to the education ID, which is transposed effectively and goes along this way here. So it's going to find the first where it matches the education ID, and then it's going to paste the data in. So if the education matched with column 11, it's going to paste the data in here effectively, even from the row 1 that we started from in the source. So hopefully you get that, and that means we can do a bit more than just copying and pasting straight. We can actually do it conditionally based upon matching values from source to target. And again, those conditions could be not just one condition. You may also add in an AND statement and an OR statement to say, well, if it's equal to this column's equal to this, or this column's equal to something else, or indeed you may the same target column could be equal to 2 source values. So that's an example of a condition. The second row here is uses the same condition rules as the first one. We're just copying the data from a different source, and it's showing that we're putting data from 2 different sources and merging them together into one target as an example. So once we've done all that and we've set up those rules and we've given it a name, important to give it a name, you can't save without it, because that's the name that appears up here and allows us to edit and run it. If you didn't give it a name, you wouldn't know what to select. In fact, it wouldn't allow you to save. There's couple of useful buttons down here. One is validate. So validate looks at the data now you've completely entered it and all the rules that you've applied, and does some checks to make sure it all makes sense, that the number of source columns equals the number, in this case target rows, that the conditions match up, that make sense effectively for the data. So we haven't specified a true here when it needs to be a false, etc., etc. So it does some basic checks and will tell you a list of invalid conditions, and there may be many of them. If there are quite a lot, that's invalid effectively. In this case, everything matches up. The other button here is a clone setting. And this is useful if you've specified a series of conditions for a source and maybe you want to reuse them, but you want to change the target to some different target. In this case, you can take this view, and if you hit the clone button, what it's going to do is it's going to create a new version of this with a blank name and allow you to enter that in. So I need to come out of this and go back in now, because that's just blanked out the name that I originally had when I was editing. So we'll come back in again, so that's the original one. And then the only other button here is the close button, which I pressed just now, or the save settings, which basically it takes your settings as they are and saves them. Notice the save settings doesn't actually apply any validation rules. You have to validate it beforehand separately. This allows you to save what you've done at a point in time without having completed all the rules, because potentially it would be invalid if you hadn't completed all the rules. So you press the save, it's just going to save those settings. Now, where does it save it to? It actually saves it in the add-in itself. So the add-in is an Excel workbook in its own right, and it saves data within there. So you can actually then it retrieves that from that. Okay, so look, we've set up our conditions, we've edited them, created them, we now want to run them. So the simple process of running them is really straightforward. You go to your drop down list of run, you select what you want to run, you run it, it'll come back and say where do you want to save this to. You specify where you want to save it to. You notice the name here, it's actually taken the target workbook name and it's added one to it, so that it doesn't overwrite what's already there. That's just a safety thing. You could rename it or save it as the same name, but better to save it with a new name so that you don't overwrite those settings and you get back to your original one if things have gone wrong for whatever reason. Well, the next thing to do is just go and have a look at it and see what it's done. So now we're going to go in and open it up. We'll go to the computer, browse, browse, we'll go to the target workbook and we'll go open. So there you see it's open it up. What you noticed, evidence, is these were all the student IDs. Of course, some student IDs didn't match up, so they've got no details in there. The ones that did match up, i.e. we found it and it was for year 1 and the student was still current, it's filled in the data. And it pulled the data from both those sources. So that's all I really wanted to show today. It gives you an understanding of some of the functionality of Copy Worksheets. This example source and target worksheets are actually in the same folder as the add-in, so you can download those and run it yourself just to test it. And hopefully this has been useful. Thank you very much.